So weather modification in itself, I mean, it's a huge topic and a huge can of worms, and it's hard for many people to think that there are these people that are trying to control people at all or move history in a direction at all. But boy, wouldn't weather be powerful? And they're already talking about what the 20th century and DARPA strategists talk about all the time is that you really don't need bullets. We're talking about technologies that can, zap in and control people. And when you introduce this idea, I think people in the back of their mind kind of believe that one. I think the average person kind of has a sense that that's possible. We talk about weather. People have been programmed, and you're going to get a chuckle out of that. But of course, what is the ultimate weaponization that man himself should not even exist? Of course, that's the massive depopulation agenda, the population bomb idea. What's precious and sacred is the earth, and man breathing is bad. I mean, you would need such spell casting in order to get population en masse to believe that. So how did they come up with this idea? Well, famously, the Club of Rome, which, one of the oligarchs kind of think tank policy groups, came up with in the 70s and again in the 80s, would be this idea that man himself is the enemy, and it would launch this whole manufactured idea in the 1970s of an energy shortage and this idea of tying American currency to a petrodollar and so forth. And before I read about this idea of this hoaxed global warming thing, that's um, I remember the 1970s, and I mean, people, if you're of this age when they were projecting 20 years, no fuel, you don't think these grand strategists that control the banking system and secondarily the energy systems and then the corporations can project pretty well over the next 50 and 100 years. So when we have so much oil now, 50 years later, that we can't get it to refineries. It's coming here. They knew this. I mean, but this is back in the 1970s when they're talking, the idea is that somehow it came from organic matter or dinosaur bones, or, there's some large fictions that have been put out there. And that's, again, how PR propaganda works. I'm not saying anything new. You put it on the screen with images, with attractive people or authoritarian figures. It's backed by institutions or prestige, cachet, I should say. And the Harvard researcher says this, and the Stanford researcher says that, and you're crazy for questioning the narrative. But how did this whole global warming hoax get cooked up in the first place? In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. The real enemy then is humanity itself. That's from public record at the Club of Rome meeting. This was manufactured. And so you say, well, the temperature did vary, and if you can control the weather, and you control the weather services, you can play around with some numbers. But if you believe that the pressing problem for humanity is changing temperatures of the earth, take the time to, instead of just deferring to some authoritative figures, just think for yourself, use the tools of your own perception and start doing some research on that and see if anything about that adds up. So it all comes together in this package. America would be this model for control at this experiment station. Francis Bacon said this in the Elizabethan age. And now Brzezinski says we're between two ages and we can really kick this thing into high-tech gear. And use the lab rats we call Americans as a testing ground. And that's not to say that people around the world, but it's a special kind of testing ground for the elites because they're going to live under the illusion that they're the freest people on earth, and they would never accept the idea that they've been actually a critical control group for the New World Order from the get go. And as I've said before, since the mechanical framing of Federalist 10, that you'd have these infinitely expanding political spheres or federations. So, America, down to its Declaration of Independence and its purported ideology of freeing individuals from the shackles of oligarchy, nothing could have ever been further from the truth that it is, in fact, the most controlled. Now, does that mean that the boots crushing on Americans heavier than everybody else? No. It's controlled to create a kind of people that the oligarchs find useful for the final projection of their agenda. And let me finish with this. Because again, he's a standout guy, comes on these morning shows. Oh, what a great mind, what a great planner. And so Brzezinski will say, and this, you can take a lot of quotes, but I think this is indicative of his life's work and his writings. He would say on page 72, Brzezinski, again, between two ages, 1970, Marxism represents a further vital and creative stage in the maturing of man's universal vision. Again, there's got to be a duping delight in all this. He's saying that's the end game. I mean, we're going to pit at some point communism and capitalism and come out with this alchemical mix. But at the end of the day, it's like what these Fabian socialists wanted all the time. Wells and Huxley and Bertrand Russell and Webb and so forth. They're all talking about this. The end game, it's collectivism. Communism is the plan. It will be communism. Now, is it going to be like Soviet communism or Chinese communism? No, but that is the ideology. And the change, of course, will be, as these thinkers have talked about, whereas religion is the opiate of the people, they have to bash that nihilism away because you're going to learn to worship these oligarchical masters, or how they fashion themselves into a master race because they desire to usurp God, become the husband masters, and be worshipped as gods. Thank you for joining Dr. Deep State.